people. So today we're going to be diving into the most essential tools needed in music production in any DAW or any genre or any sort of music project in general. So I mean, these things, it's taken me a long time. I've been doing this stuff for 15 years now, and it's taken me a long time to understand these things and make enough mistakes with them that I can confidently tell you that these tips will really speed up your workflow and your understanding. I'm going to try and run through it as clearly and as quickly as possible. So that's the objective of this video. And I mean, really, I wanted to start off by sort of like going here and sort of just like talking about the effects and just letting you know that a lot of people say straight up that what comes first, the chicken or egg? I'm kidding. EQ or compression. And I'm just gonna tell you straight up, it really depends on context. I'll tell you, for example, on some sounds, to have like EQ just before essentially roll off the bass will add a lot, and actually help the compression do a lot less work. We'll get into that stuff a bit more in depth later, but we're just going to start off really talking about EQ and what it does. And I'm going to play this sound for you, this key sound in isolation. Right, so that's enough. Essentially, EQ is just an XY graph of the loudness of certain frequencies. So you're given basically all the frequency spectrums, and this is just true of any single sound. Essentially, you need to understand, essentially we get to this top 20k, equivalent of this is 20k, it becomes hard to hear sounds. Below about 50, it's also hard to hear sounds unless you're a dog and you've got mad hearing. So essentially, that's what you need to understand about the top and the bottom. And from that, we'll talk about, for me, the most essential tool really when it comes to EQ, which is low and high pass. And you find them in basically every single EQ. And they come at different degrees. So this one's a sort of softer knee. And then if you choose this 1 times 4, it's going to essentially be a sharper roll off. So we're going to start rolling off a sound, and then essentially, this sound has so much frequency content in it. When I played it, we're going to start shaving off and get to a point in which we like it. So let's go. Cool. So I mean, for me, I like it where it's at right now. I think 164 does a good job, and we just rolled it off. If we were to do the same thing at the top, you'll be able to sort of like basically get a bandpass effect. And a bandpass essentially is just when you have no low or high frequencies and it's all focused in the middle. So let's do that quickly. So that's a band pass right there. That's what it looks like. It's basically like just a little whatever. Yeah, you get the idea. And essentially, that is also a very useful tool to have and to know. And obviously, you need to use that to your ear and to your taste. But essentially, those two are really going to do a lot for your sound. Whether your sound needs to take off the highs or the lows, it'll do both of those for you. But I won't do all of that, everything that you need to do with an EQ. So we'll also talk quickly about the bell. So bells also essentially is going to boost along with the Q, and Q basically makes the curve of this bell shape narrower or wider essentially. So we're going to sort of like scan the frequencies and see where's a nice sort of point for the Q to be at. So and quickly, just to make a point, just to go very extreme with it, let's just go. And that also creates, what some people will call a barber pole effect, but we're not going to go into depth there today. But essentially, I like 170 for this. I think it adds a little bit nice. So here's a good point to get into talking about the frequency range itself, right? So when you're looking at these things and these numbers and what they represent, below 100 is essentially sub bass sounds, and it's super essential in music. I mean, if you don't have these frequencies, things don't sound natural, essentially, because this is natural with humans. Even the stuff which humans can't hear, we perceive, right? So we still retain a little bit of that in our music. So for bass sounds, for example, just to touch on it really quickly, you're gonna wanna, like, for stuff which is basically just all focus in the bass, for kicks and for basses themselves, congas, toms, all that stuff. You probably want to actually, for toms congas, you can roll off a lot higher. But for essentially kicks and basses, you want to be able to roll off. A lot of people start 25. I like to do 27 to 28. We're not going to pull up a bass now to sort of do that demo, and we're going to just put this back to where it was. But that's just to make a point about those frequencies which you can't hear, which you still can't hear, are absolutely essential in music. So you need to be careful with EQ, and just explain a bit more about the other ranges. So like we said, 100 below that is all the bass, important information. Between 100 to 300, you can't see the number here, that's 300, is essentially just the muddiness and boxiness, but it starts to add a bit more detail. So if you just listen to 100 alone of a sound, and might just do that quickly just to actually demonstrate, I think it'll probably be a better idea, just having this idea now before I plan that video. But let's roll this all the way down to 100. I'll put this on a sharper cue so we can hear it a bit more detailed. So you can see, you can barely hear what's going on in the keys now. Lift it to 300. Yeah, you begin to hear that detail, and it's going to start to compete with my voice, because my voice is quite bassy. So basically lift up to 1K, what you start to hear a bit more clarity, because that's all the low mid high detail essentially. So at this point, you basically start to get a sense of what the sound is really, and it's going to add all the sort of body. Anything below 300 to 1K is body. And to make a further point, just mute this quickly. To make a further point, go from 1K to 5K, essentially. And this stuff, what's it sound like to you? It sounds like air, because it's what is often referred to as air frequencies. From 1 to 3 to 5K is like the air frequencies. So you roll that back, and then above that is just, it's going to start to get to essentially being high frequencies, stuff which we can't really hear but we feel, and is super important. Even like I said, 10K to 20K, we've only got one band here, but you can sort of see that in the context of the whole sound, it's adding something, just particularly in the sound designer of this whatever, just start to add a little frequency at the top range. Cool, whatever. But moving on, the last thing to touch on, the EQ, is really just another just hopping back to just the other commonly used type of EQ setting, is a high shelf, and this will be last of it for the EQ. And this is going to really just gently boost, sort of the air frequencies and the higher detail which we talked about. So I'm just going to quickly do that, put around, I know, somewhere just above 5. Let's see. doing like a nice job. And sorry, my bad for that. If it got too out of control, you could just, again, like we said, grab that high pass. So essentially, that's what we are sort of using EQ to do, is to shape the sound. And for this, you can see that we've taken out the unnecessary bass information, we've added more middle clarity, and added even higher clarity as well in the mix. And again, you can add clarity, or you can take it away. If there's just too much detail at the top, you can simply just whack that down, right? You can even sort of hear, I think, well, there's a bit of noise on the signal, so I think you can sort of hear already sort of the effect of that if your headphones are good enough. Anyway, that is that. We'll get rid of this EQ and we'll move on to compression, right? And compression essentially is, just think of what the meaning of that is. Compression is basically just pushing stuff together, right? And what this does is push the higher detail and frequencies together with the lower detail and frequencies of that signal. And you're going to hear that in context, but quickly, just before I turn it on, you'll see that you get a few different controls. This one emulates a very well-known compressor. There's many different types of compressors, at least 7 I can name right now, but we're going to stick with just this one because I think it's great for visual learners. Yeah, I mean, essentially, what's really important about compressors is the ratio and the threshold. 2 is quite light. 2 is what you're going to normally start off with, 1.52, and then it kind of goes to 4, 10, and then beyond 10 essentially becomes extreme compression, to the point where it comes another effect. So moving on, we're going to go into the next effect, which is compression. And compression, essentially, if you think about the meaning, it's just pushing and compressing things together, right? And in this context of music, that means compressing of our higher sounds and frequencies with the lower ones. And what that gives you is more of an average sound and more contained sound, as opposed to, frequencies and volume being all over the place within one sound, because, just sound is a change of pressure of airwaves or something like that throughout time. I don't know, but essentially it contains that. So if we play the sound, you can already see there's a bit of feedback on this. There's a bit of visual feedback coming from the threshold, and threshold together with the ratio are really what set the compressor going. As well with the makeup compensates for the threshold, so really these can move in tandem. And I'm going to start off with, the default was 4, but we're going to start off with 2 because 2 is a lighter compression. And, it tends to, I think, starting off with a lighter compression as you go throughout the chain is good. And then, you can sort of do a harsher compression maybe after your first compressor, right? But essentially, I'm playing the sound and trying to just get a bit more of a very subtly sort of contained sound from what it was. So. So we'll stop there, and essentially just notice it's kind of gone to what that represents in this. This is all sort of negative. So actually, this is negative. What it's actually doing 3 to 5 degrees of compression, because it's down as compression, is basically pushing the highest sounds down by 3 to 5 dB. It's the highest peaks within that sound down to down 3 or 5 dB. So essentially, that's what's happening here, and the way we compensate it is a lot of the time people and it's just generally, like, I think very useful to sort of set somewhere around 3. Obviously compressors in any sound depends on what you're trying to achieve, but for gentle compression, which is what we're doing right now, 3 is gonna sort of like compensate for the threshold and sort of bring it back up to par. So So sorry, I just had to pause the recording, but essentially, sort of, yeah. So we've gotten back to a decent level, right, from before and after. If you're listening with good headphones or speakers, you're gonna notice that it just sounds more contained. Like before, the frequencies and volume are all over. That's gonna sort of draw it in, but it's not so overwhelming that it starts to affect its character. But we're gonna do that, and whilst we affect this character, we're gonna explain actually what the threshold levels mean, which is really important, especially for beginners, understanding what different levels of compression is going to get you. And I think sometimes it's just skipped over so much. So if we bring this down 1 to 2, bring this down 1 to 2, you barely hearing the effect. It's going to be very subtle. I mean, I hear, you know, having done music production for a long time, but it's very subtle still. So, you know. And then you have the level, the range, which I often recommend, I often set at for light compression, which is 3 to 5 dB, because that's going to get you a noticeable compression, but it's not so radical that it's going to destroy the sound at all. Or essentially, if you want compression, you know, it's essentially a good level to start with. Quickly just kick out even past that, so we're going to try and get to 5 to 10 dB of compression. Actually scratch that, we'll do 5 to 7, sorry, my bad. And then, you know, once I turn it on and off, you begin to sort of notice the effect even more. It's really grabbing the sort of like the higher volumes of that sound and pushing them down to a point where you can notice it. So this is why I don't do it in the sort of 5 to 7 range unless it really calls for it. For vocals, which are very dynamic, it could be a good idea. So don't take that as a hard and fast rule. And for anything really, even guitars, actually would allow a sort of looser compression, because you want to sort of capture the performance and dynamics of it. So it's all, you know, dependent on the situation, and that's also why you got dry or wet to mix in the signal according to what you want. So quickly, it's going to go beyond that, and past this point is just basically an effect. It's for me, it's like yeah, just using compression as an effect, a noticeable effect. And you know, another thing just to touch on is that you can actually compensate, you know, for the high levels of compression with a makeup gain still, so you can keep going, but that's going to potentially just introduce distortion, other things like that. For me, that doesn't sound terrible, but it sounds, again, a bit too much. So we're gonna just push it even more, and yeah, after that, just finish off this section. Doing my internal thought experiments there, but essentially I think that's all you need. I think I'm going to set it back down to about this range and quickly touch on the last things you need to know about a compressor, which is really attack and release. And attack is going to set how fast the compressor starts working. So the longer the attack is, they're sort of more potentially natural sounding, but also more washed out. It can sort of feel the shorter it is, the quicker it starts, and the more upfront it is, and the more transients you preserve in the process. But essentially, that is what's going on with the attack. I'm going to set it back to the middle, and actually it's set because essentially I like it around the 3. If we just do a quick test. Yeah, I think that's good. And quickly on the release is going to set how quickly the compressor stops working, right? So how quickly it releases the compressor from actually acting on the signal. So auto is a feature which is on a lot of compressors, which will set automatically for you, but 6s normally go to longer is going to sort of like add more compression essentially, or more compression to the signal, or make add more sustain if it's a guitar, for example. And shorter is it's going to just sort of be even quicker and maybe sharper, and actually sort of allow for sort of transients to come through a bit more. So, but essentially that's all you need to sort of know when it comes to compression as it starts. And as I said, there's lots of different types of compression, so let me know if there's any particular types. There's optical, there's variable, like all the stuff I didn't even know, to be honest. Like the variable compressor, actually just new in past 6 months. But other types are called optical, your glue compressors, limiters, which are also a different type of compression. We can discuss that, so let me know what you want to hear next in this series. And finally, we're going to move on to my best friend. A lot of my closest friends will just say I'm the quickest to say slap a saturate on a signal, because I just like luscious sounds, right? And I'm going to sort of like play this with the drums as well, which we've kind of kept muted to this point, and see if we can kind of get this to pop out in contrast to the drums a little bit more. Before we do that, it'll be a good point to touch on what saturators actually are and do. When again, if we just talk about the meaning of saturating something in color, it's just adding sort of like more vividness and essentially more red. And in audio terms, it's very much the same, adding more drive, but a subtle drive. It's kind of not just overdrive, it's a sort of stage before overdrive, even though overdrive is, but don't get too fucking technical. But essentially that is saturators, and they're going to add a little bit more harmonics and subtle drive to your signal. And what that's going to do is just going to allow sort of the sort of quieter details to stand out a little bit more. And what I like to do, what you get on most saturators, as you're seeing on mine, is the drive and the output. And these again are the two places to start, and these will affect the sound the most, because that's how hard you drive it, and then the output's how much you compensate. And really, when it comes to saturation, compensating is very important, because your drive is essentially just boosting for volume, but with distortion, which is different from just boosting volume, because that's clean gain. We're not going to get into that, but essentially you get different types, and I want to make a point to not overwhelm you with these types of saturations, because essentially, as you sort of begin your journey of production, or you're already on it, you're going to just be exposed to different types and different situations. But really, just understanding what the main things and aspects about it are is what's going to allow you to use all the different types later on, right? And stuff is kind of obvious. Like a digital clip kind of emulates sort of like the more sort of digital sounding distortion you hear when you maybe use a plasticky device from 2000s, like a Nokia brick phone, on its loudest volume or something like that. But like, yeah, essentially analog clip is what you find, and analog is what a lot of saturation plugins try and emulate. Is just the sound of the warmness people used to get from not using computers all the time to make music. So essentially it gives you the sound of real tubes or distortion. And for this, keep it very simple and sweet, short. You're also gonna sort of want to sort of dial back the dry and wet, because very quickly, if you start to add too much distortion early on in the signal, unless the sound calls for it, and absolutely do it for sound, for taste, and for vibe, 100% experiment. But it's gonna get quite a lot. So I like to just sort of like back it down, even sort of start with 50% as a midpoint. But for this example, we're just gonna sort of leave it on 100 and see if we can get a nice sound with the drums. So you should be able to hear, if you're using good headphones or speakers, that it becomes more detailed in the sound. But also what's very important to note, and is perhaps most important to know when using saturators, which people just need to be told straight up, is to compensate for the volume. Unless you really do need to boost volume, you want to do that intentionally, make sure that you're compensating for volume. And this is one of the tips which, like I said, I just will end up getting to the end of a chain. You add these first 3 fundamental plugins, effects, whatever, and then you add a bunch more for vibe effects, so you end up with 10 plugins on a chain. But by that point, you've boosted, because you added 2 saturators, a compressor, XYZ, you've boosted volume so much to just compensate on sound. That's really all that needs to be sort of said there. And lastly, you kind of get with saturation a lot of options often to play with sort of the EQ frequencies, because it sounds nicer to boost certain frequencies using certain types of distortion than it does others. So without getting too complex, we're just going to sort of like play around with boosting the mid focus of the saturation, right? So we're just going to sort of, because saturation often, not always, but typically deals with mid frequency. So and like I said, it deals with mid frequencies, because when you go lower you start to hear it a lot more, right? But when you sort of come up and you go a bit more subtle, it sounds nice and gentle. That sounds great now, because it's sounding like when you add that saturator, it actually, the keys stand out, and sort of like have their own place amongst the drums and not getting drowned out by the drums now. So that's the whole point. But it's also important to note that the volume hasn't also gone crazy, because we've been compensating for the volume, which is also, again, just a very important idea when it comes to saturation. Add as much as you want, just compensate and make sure everything is to taste and is non-destructive for later stages. Because another thing which I did mean to mention was that there's just several types. So people often start the chain off with a preamp, which is a sort of type of overdrive saturation, because they're basically the same thing. And then you move to a bus saturator, right? So if it's actually on your sort of like door or whatever, and then people add a saturator on one of the sends, or returns, or whatever you want to call it, and then add mastering saturation. So there's loads of different points, and one thing I wish I was told sooner is just don't go so heavy on saturation early on, or the end of your recording is going to sound like it's basically been roasted in the oven. So just take it slow, do everything to taste, compensate, because it will help you on. And all this stuff, you can add it back in more later on if you need to. But essentially, I think I've really run through everything you need to know, and I'm just gonna sort of like just play through the track once more and just see what we've done here today. So yeah, I mean, if I was going to use an actual track, you know, it's actually got a place now, and it's not going to clash with other things I've decided to bring in. But also, it sounds like it's got, you know, it's a unique spot, but I can also just change its sound very easily if I need to. So that's essentially what I wanted you people to get from today. All of these things, I hope that I've broken it down in a simple enough way. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'll answer it as quickly as possible. And yeah, just like and subscribe. Tell me exactly what you want next, because I'm at the point of just to be open in this journey of making content where I'll literally just, you know, like I want to provide value to people. So let me know if there's a particular video you want beginner's advice or intermediate advice on. I'll probably upload it next week if someone suggests a good enough idea. So obviously that's not to say I'm begging for ideas, but yeah, people, I hope you got enough from this, and let me know again if there's anything else you want advice with. Love, peace, and happy music production.